They say we're all just one wrong turn away from changing our lives forever. For Michael Hayes, that turn came on a Thursday afternoon in a New York City hospital when he pushed open door 314 instead of 316. Inside that room was a woman he'd never met, lying pale against white sheets, her breathing shallow, her eyes closed. No flowers on the nightstand, no cards, no one waiting in the chair by the window. Just silence and the steady beep of machines keeping time with a life that seemed to be slipping away unnoticed. Michael stood there, frozen, holding sunflowers meant for someone else. And in that moment, without knowing it, he made a choice that would unravel everything he thought he knew about survival, about grief, and about what it means to truly live. Michael Hayes wasn't the kind of man who made mistakes. He kept his life carefully controlled, measured, predictable. Work at the warehouse, pick up his daughter from school, dinner, homework, bed, repeat. The hospital visit that Thursday was already pushing against the boundaries of what he allowed himself. An old college buddy had called from a recovery room, routine surgery, nothing serious, but could Michael stop by, bring something cheerful? Michael didn't like hospitals. The smell alone dragged him back 3 years to the weeks he'd spent in rooms just like these, watching his wife fade, holding her hand while the machines beeped their relentless countdown. But he'd promised, so he bought the sunflowers at a bodega on 3rd Avenue and drove to Mount Sinai, gripping the steering wheel too tight, breathing through his mouth to avoid the antiseptic air. 3rd floor, room 314, that's what the text message said. Michael stepped off the elevator into a corridor that smelled like disinfectant and something else, something vaguely sweet he couldn't place. The hallway stretched in both directions, identical doors on either side, each one concealing its own private suffering. He turned left, counted the numbers, 310, 312. The next door had no nameplate, no chart hanging outside. He nudged it open with his shoulder and stepped inside, and immediately knew something was wrong. The woman on the bed didn't move. Her face was so pale it nearly disappeared into the pillowcase. Dark hair fanned around her head like someone had arranged it that way for a portrait. The only sound was the monitor beside her, beeping softly, steadily. Michael's brain struggled to catch up. This wasn't his friend. This wasn't even a man. He glanced back at the door, confused. Then he noticed the rest of the room. Empty. Not just empty, abandoned. No flowers wilting in a vase, no get well cards propped against the water pitcher. No jacket draped over the visitor's chair, no evidence that anyone had been here at all, or that anyone was coming. Michael didn't know why he stayed. Every rational part of him screamed to back out quietly, find the right room, laugh about the mix-up later over terrible hospital coffee. Instead, he looked down at the sunflowers in his hand. They were too bright for this place, too alive. He set them on the small table beside her bed, moving as quietly as he could, as if afraid to wake something fragile. Then he turned and left without a sound. He found his friend 2 doors down, room 316, not 314, and they talked for 20 minutes about nothing important. The whole time, Michael couldn't stop thinking about the woman in the wrong room, about how no one should be that alone. Michael told himself he'd forget about it by morning. He didn't. 3 days later, he was back at the hospital, not for his friend this time. He told himself it was just curiosity, wondering if the flowers were still there, if someone had finally shown up. He didn't plan to go inside. He walked past the room once, glanced through the small window in the door. The flowers were still there, wilting now, and the woman was awake, staring at the ceiling with an expression Michael recognized, that look of someone trapped between fighting and surrendering. He kept walking, made it all the way to the elevator, pressed the button, stood there with his hand hovering, feeling something shift in his chest. It wasn't pity. Pity was easy to ignore, easy to walk away from. This was something else, something that reminded him of sitting alone in his kitchen 3 years ago, after the funeral, after his daughter Emma had finally cried herself to sleep, when the house had gone silent, and he'd realized that nobody, not one person, had thought to leave him flowers. He turned around. This time, Michael didn't go into the room. He found a nurse at the station, an older woman with gray hair pulled back in a neat bun. Her name tag read Dorothy. He asked about the woman in 314, trying to sound casual, like it didn't matter. Dorothy looked up from her computer. For a moment, she seemed hesitant. Then something in Michael's face must have convinced him he wasn't a threat. "Sarah Bennett," she said softly, like she was used to delivering bad news. "She's been here 2 weeks, stage 3 lymphoma. She's responding to treatment, but it's slow going." Michael nodded. He didn't ask the question he really wanted to ask. Dorothy answered it anyway. "No visitors," she said, even quieter now. "Not a single one." Michael sat in his car for 10 minutes before starting the engine. He didn't understand what he was doing. He had a daughter to take care of, a job that barely paid enough to cover rent and groceries. He didn't have space in his life for someone else's tragedy. But that night, after he tucked Emma into bed and read her 2 chapters of the book she was obsessed with, he sat at the kitchen table and made a list. Small things, things that wouldn't mean much to anyone else but might mean everything to someone alone. The next day, he brought a book, a paperback he'd read twice and loved enough to pass on. He didn't go into the room. He left it with Dorothy and asked her to put it on the table. The day after that, he brought a small potted plant, something that wouldn't die as fast as flowers. Then a soft gray blanket. Then a card with a landscape on the front and nothing written inside. He never stayed, never introduced himself, never wanted credit. He just wanted her to know that someone was thinking about her, that she wasn't as alone as that room made her feel. 2 weeks passed. Michael kept coming. He started to recognize the nurses, and they started to recognize him. Dorothy smiled every time she saw him, took whatever he brought without asking questions. Michael didn't know if Sarah noticed, didn't know if she cared. He told himself it didn't matter, but every time he walked away from that hospital, something inside him felt a little less hollow, like he was filling a hole he hadn't known was there.
Then one afternoon, Dorothy stopped him before he could leave. She had a strange look on her face, not worried exactly, more like she was holding back a secret. "She's asking about you," Dorothy said. Michael felt his stomach tighten. "What do you mean?" "She wants to know who's been leaving things for her." "What did you tell her?" Dorothy shrugged. "I told her I didn't know your name. But she's getting better, sitting up now, talking more. The doctors think she might be discharged in a few weeks." Michael nodded slowly. Part of him wanted to disappear before it got complicated. The other part, the part he didn't like to admit existed, wanted to meet her, to see if the person matched the quiet image he'd built in his head. The next day, he brought a small journal, something she could write in if she wanted. He handed it to Dorothy like always, but she shook her head. "You should give it to her yourself," Dorothy said. Michael stared at her. "I don't think that's a good idea." "Why not?" He didn't have an answer, at least not one that made sense out loud. Dorothy just smiled and pointed down the hallway. "Room 314, she's awake." Michael walked slowly, stopped outside her door and looked through the window. Sarah was sitting up, reading the book he'd left 2 weeks ago. Her hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail, and she looked stronger, still pale, still thin, but unmistakably alive. He knocked softly. She looked up. Their eyes met through the glass. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then she smiled, just a small one, but it was enough. Michael opened the door and stepped inside. "Hi," he said. His voice came out rougher than he meant. "Hi," Sarah said, setting the book down. "You're the one who's been leaving things." It wasn't a question. Michael nodded anyway. "I wasn't sure you were real," she said. "I thought maybe the nurses were just being nice." "They are nice," Michael said. "But no, it was me." Sarah studied him for a long moment. Not suspicious, just curious, like she was trying to solve a puzzle. "Why?" she asked. Michael didn't have a good answer. He thought about lying, making up something simple. But standing there, looking at her, he realized she deserved the truth, or at least the closest thing to it he could manage. "I walked into the wrong room," he said, "and you were alone. I guess I just thought no one should be that alone." Something in Sarah's eyes softened. She nodded once, like she understood more than he'd said. "Thank you," she said quietly. Michael held out the journal. "I brought this, in case you wanted to write, or draw, or just have something to do." She took it from him, ran her fingers over the cover. "I used to write," she said, "before all this." "Maybe you still can," Michael said. Sarah looked up at him again, and this time her smile was a little wider. "Maybe." Michael didn't know what else to say. This wasn't anonymous anymore. This was real, and real meant complicated. "I should go." "Will you come back?" Sarah asked. Michael hesitated. He thought about Emma, about the carefully controlled life he'd built to protect them both, about how easy it would be to say no and walk away clean. "Yeah," he said, I'll come back." And he did. Michael came back the next day, and the day after that. Over the next 2 weeks, he visited 4 more times. Each visit felt easier. Sarah was getting stronger, her color was coming back, she could sit up longer without getting tired. The nurses said her latest scans looked promising. She might be discharged by the end of the month. Michael should have been happy for her. He was, but underneath that relief was something else, a quiet dread that once she left this place, whatever they were building would just disappear. One afternoon, Sarah asked the question he'd been avoiding. "Why don't you ever talk about yourself?" Michael shifted in his chair. "There's not much to say." "I don't believe that." Michael looked down at his hands. "I have a daughter. Her name's Emma. She's 8. You're a dad." "Yeah." "Where's her mom?" Michael felt the familiar tightness in his chest. "She died 3 years ago. Cancer." The room went quiet. Sarah didn't say she was sorry. She didn't offer empty comfort. She just looked at him like she understood exactly what it meant to lose something you could never get back. "That's why you were here," Sarah said quietly. "That's why you walked into the wrong room." Michael nodded. Sarah reached over and touched his hand, just briefly, then pulled back. "Thank you for staying," Michael said. Michael left the hospital that day feeling raw, exposed. He picked up Emma from school and took her to the park. They sat on the swings and she told him about her spelling test, about the boy who'd pulled her hair at recess. Michael listened, tried to focus, but his mind kept drifting back to the hospital, to Sarah, to the way she'd looked at him when he told her about his wife. That night, after Emma went to bed, Michael sat at the kitchen table and stared at his phone. He thought about texting Dorothy, asking how Sarah was doing, but that felt like crossing another line. He was getting too involved. He was afraid of what it meant that he looked forward to seeing her, afraid that he was starting to feel something he had no right to feel. For 3 days, he didn't visit. He told himself he was busy, that Emma needed him, but the truth was simpler than that. He was terrified. On the 4th day, Dorothy called him. "She's asking for you." Michael's stomach dropped. "Is she okay?" "Physically, yes, but she noticed you stopped coming. I think she's worried you're not coming back." Michael closed his eyes. "I'll be there tomorrow." He showed up the next afternoon with a bag of books from a used bookstore on Amsterdam Avenue. When he walked into her room, Sarah looked up with an expression he couldn't quite read. Relief, maybe, or something close to it. "I thought you disappeared," she said. "I'm sorry," Michael said. "I got caught up with things." Sarah nodded, but she didn't look convinced. "You don't have to keep coming, you know. I'll be okay." Michael set the bag of books on the table. "I know, but I want to." They fell into a rhythm after that. Michael visited 3 times a week. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence. Sarah told him about her life before. She'd been a freelance graphic designer, working from home, keeping to herself. Her parents had died in a car accident when she was in college. She'd never been close with extended family. Friends had drifted over the years. By the time she got sick, there was no one to call. Michael told her about Emma, about how hard it was to raise a daughter alone, about the guilt he carried for not being enough. Sarah listened without judgment. She didn't try to fix anything. She just let him talk. One Thursday, Michael brought Emma with him. He'd been putting it off, but Emma had started asking questions. "Where do you go on Thursdays? Who are you visiting?" He'd run out of excuses. Emma walked into the hospital room with wide eyes, holding Michael's hand tight. Sarah smiled at her from the bed. "You must be Emma," she said. Emma nodded shyly. "Your dad's told me a lot about you. He says you're really good at math." "That's amazing." "I was terrible at math."
2 weeks later, Sarah was discharged. The doctor said her scans were clean. The treatment had worked. She'd need follow-ups, but for now, she was in remission. Michael helped her pack the few things she'd accumulated. The books, the blanket, even the dried sunflowers she'd kept in a vase long after they'd died. "What are you going to do now?" Michael asked. Sarah folded the blanket carefully. "Go home, I guess. Try to figure out what normal looks like." "Do you have someone to help you?" Sarah shook her head. "I'll be okay. I've been alone before." Michael didn't like the sound of that. The thought of her going back to an empty apartment, recovering alone, it felt wrong. "You have my number," Michael said, "if you need anything." They exchanged a few more words, and then Sarah left with a nurse to finish the paperwork. Michael stood in the empty room, looking at the bed she'd been in for weeks, feeling the weight of something ending. Or maybe just changing. He didn't hear from her for 3 days. Then she texted, "Made it home. Thank you for everything." Michael stared at the message for a long time before responding. He thought that would be it, that they'd drift into polite distance, the way people do when the crisis passes. But a week later, she texted again, asking if he wanted to meet for coffee. Michael said yes before he could talk himself out of it. They met at a small cafe near the hospital. Sarah looked different outside the sterile room, healthier, real. She wore an oversized sweater that made her look comfortable, almost happy. They talked for an hour about nothing and everything. It felt easy, normal, like they'd known each other longer than a few months. When they said goodbye, Michael felt something shift. This wasn't just kindness anymore. This was something else entirely. Over the next month, they met for coffee twice more. Then Sarah invited them over for dinner. She cooked pasta, and Emma helped set the table. They ate together, and for the first time in 3 years, Michael's life didn't feel empty. But underneath the ease, fear crept back in. He was starting to care about Sarah, more than he'd planned, more than felt safe. Every time he let himself feel it, he thought about his wife, about losing her, about the years of grief that had followed. He didn't know if he could survive that again. One night, lying in bed, he stared at his phone. Sarah had texted earlier, just a picture of a sunset from her window. He'd sent back a thumbs up, but he hadn't called, hadn't pushed further, because he was afraid of getting close, afraid of admitting he wanted more than friendship, afraid that wanting something good would only lead to losing it. The next week, Sarah had a follow-up appointment, routine scans, nothing to worry about. But when Michael texted to ask how it went, she didn't respond. He tried calling, no answer. 2 days passed. The silence felt like a weight pressing on his chest. Finally, Dorothy called. "Sarah's back in the hospital," she said. Michael felt the floor drop out. "What happened?" "The scan showed something. They're running more tests. She didn't want me to tell you, but I thought you should know." Michael hung up and drove straight to the hospital. He found Sarah in a different room this time, smaller, darker. She was sitting on the bed, staring at the wall. When she saw him, her face crumpled. "I thought it was over," she said, her voice breaking. "I thought I was done." Michael sat beside her and took her hand. He didn't have words. He didn't have answers. All he had was the choice to stay or leave. And for the first time in 3 years, he wasn't running. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." The tests took 3 days. Michael came every day. He brought Emma once, and she drew pictures at the foot of Sarah's bed while Michael read aloud from a book Sarah had mentioned liking. They didn't talk about the scans. They didn't talk about what would happen if the news was bad. They just existed together, and somehow that was enough. On the 3rd day, the doctor came in with results. Michael stood to leave to give Sarah privacy, but she held his hand tight. The doctor looked between them, then sat down. "The scans are clear," the doctor said. Sarah's grip loosened. She let out a breath she'd been holding for days. The doctor explained it was scar tissue from the original treatment. It had shown up differently on the scan, which is why they'd flagged it. But there was no new growth. She was still in remission. After the doctor left, Sarah looked at Michael, and for the first time she looked angry. "I can't keep doing this, waiting for the next scare. I can't live like that." Michael understood. He'd felt the same way after his wife died, the fear that every moment was borrowed time. "You don't have a choice," he said quietly. "You just have to live anyway." Sarah looked at him and something softened. "Is that what you did?" "No," Michael said honestly. "I shut down. I stopped living for a long time, but I'm trying not to do that anymore." "Because of you?" Michael didn't hesitate. "Yeah, because of you." Sarah was discharged the next day. Michael drove her home, helped her settle in. When he set down the last bag, she turned to him. "I don't want to be alone right now." "I'll stay," Michael said. They sat on her couch and talked until it got dark, about loneliness, about fear, about how they'd both chosen to stay when leaving would have been easier. Over the next few weeks, something deepened between them. Emma started calling Sarah by name. Sarah kept extra snacks in her apartment when Emma visited. One Saturday, Emma invited Sarah to her school play. Sarah said yes without hesitation. She sat between Michael and an empty seat that used to belong to his wife.
And when Emma came on stage dressed as a tree, Sarah clapped louder than anyone. That night, Michael called Sarah. "What are we doing?" he asked. "I don't know," Sarah said, "but I don't want to stop." "I'm scared," she admitted. "Me too," Michael said, "but I'd rather be scared with you than safe and alone." They got married
3 months later, a small ceremony in the backyard of Michael's house in Queens. Just a few friends, Dorothy from the hospital, and Emma, who wore a yellow dress and carried sunflowers. Sarah wore a simple white dress. Michael wore a suit he'd bought the day before. There was no grand gesture, no perfect vows, just two people choosing each other in front of the people who mattered. When they said yes, Emma clapped so loud everyone laughed. After the ceremony, they cut cake and ate on paper plates in the grass. Michael watched Emma and Sarah laugh together over frosting, and he felt something settle in his chest. Not certainty, not a promise that everything would be okay, just the knowledge that he wasn't alone anymore, that he'd found his way back to living. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the yard. Michael made a silent promise to keep showing up, to keep choosing love even when it was hard, to keep walking through the wrong doors until he found the right ones. Because in the end, that's all any of us can do. Keep moving, keep hoping, keep believing that the next room, the next moment might hold exactly what we've been looking for all along. Sometimes the wrong turn leads you exactly where you're supposed to be. Sometimes kindness doesn't need a reason. Sometimes love isn't about perfect timing or perfect people. It's about choosing to stay when it would be easier to leave. It's about showing up day after day, even when you're scared. Michael had spent 3 years running from the possibility of loss, but Sarah taught him something he'd forgotten, that life isn't about avoiding pain, it's about finding someone worth risking it for. And sometimes all it takes is walking into the wrong room to find your way home.
For more videos, please subscribe, like, and comment.